Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Welcome to another episode of the podcast that encourages and equips leaders to more effectively disciple the men in their sphere of influence. To do that each week, we talk about the very best ideas and practices in the area of discipleship and ministry to men. My name is Troy Thomas, and I'm your co-host today, along with the founder and executive director of No Regrets Men's Ministries, Steve Sonnerman. Hello, Steve.
Hey, it's great to be together again, Troy, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Well, Steve, today we are going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of building a disciple-making movement in your circle of influence. And so really excited about that. We've got a lot to talk about. And specifically, a tool developed by No Regrets Men's Ministries called DiscipleMaker101. But before we talk about what that tool is, we need to talk about the why. We always like to start with the why. Now, Steve, it's football season. You and I both grew up with Vince Lombardi, and the legend, of course, goes that he would start every training camp the same way. He'd say, "Men, this is a football." So like Lombardi, we have to start with the mission of the church. And the mission of every church is the same: to make disciples everywhere. That's the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where Jesus says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." And that's the mission. That's the mission of the church: make disciples everywhere. So all of us as leaders should be asking, what is my plan for making disciples? And is my plan working? Do I have a plan, and does it work? If a ministry leader can't answer these questions, then DiscipleMaker 101 is going to help them build a disciple-making movement. Steve, before we get into an overview of DiscipleMaker 101, can you just talk about why you felt the need to develop this? How did it begin? What were the origins, the roots of this?
Yeah, Troy, when I first became a believer, the guy that led me to the Lord, John Slack, he gave me a book probably within a month at the end of my senior year of coming to Christ. And it was The Master Plan of Evangelism by Robert Coleman. And of course, that is a classic, and I would just recommend everyone to read it. But in there, the basic premise is that Jesus was not concerned with the multitudes, but with a small group of men. And the whole premise is looking at how Jesus interacted with those 12 men and prepared them to launch the church. And Jesus was never concerned with numbers. And yet in the church today, we're so obsessed with numbers, and yet Jesus never was. And so in every area of ministry that I've been involved in, high school ministry, then college, and then men's, I've just had this real heart to disciple others and to cast that vision. Well, so much of what we've done the last number of years with No Regrets has been sort of at the church basis, at the church level, of helping churches understand how do we reach men for Jesus and root them in Jesus and release them for kingdom impact. And I thought, what I want to do is really just help that ordinary guy who's sitting in the pews, because I think so many guys feel inadequate. They feel like they're not equipped to minister to those in their sphere of influence. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that the average man has about 154 people in their sphere of influence, in their family, their extended family, their neighborhood, condo complex, their coworkers, their friends, the guys at church. And I think the average guy in the pew is wondering, okay, what does it mean for me as a guy who's in school, or a guy who likes to go golfing on the weekend, who spends 50 or 60 hours a week? What does it look like for me to impact the world for Jesus? What does influence look like? And I just, in conversations with men, I found so many guys that just felt paralyzed, and they just didn't know where to start. And so I thought, let's go back from the church level just to the individual level, and say, what can we what kind of tool could we develop to help that guy, to equip them? So, because so many guys, as we know, have this fear of failure, and they're afraid to step out because they're afraid of fear of failing. So I thought, let's develop something that will equip them, empower them, and really open up their eyes to how God can use them right where they are, and that every man has a space and a place where God wants to use them.
That is so important to recognize what is, not what we think should be. Recognize the men who are in front of us. Recognize the guys who are not feeling equipped to do this. Don't understand what it can mean to make disciples or how to do that. That is an area, I think, if we look at our history, a lot of times we've talked over men and talked around them and haven't really spoken directly to them about how they can do this in very, very practical terms. And so tell me about DiscipleMaker 101, and just first off, where is it in its development and rollout right now, and where do you hope to go with it?
Yeah, I can tell you, it is I think one of the best things that I've ever developed, and I'm most excited about, because it's just for the everyday guy, helping them become a fearless influencer in society. And so we took about a year to write it. And that was a slow process of developing the lessons. And then we last summer, we took a number of days and we recorded 24 videos. Then we edited it, and then we put it in a format that could be used either by an individual, a small group, or can be done live at a church. And so for the individual and for the small group, there are 10 lessons, and there's a study guide with each one of the lessons where you have an outline of the material. There's reflection questions, there's discussion questions. There's a supplemental book that goes with it, the Disciple Maker's Handbook by Bobby Harrington. And you're not required to buy that, but we really, really recommend it. It's I think one of the best books on discipleship out there today, and so we recommend you get that as well. And so, like I said, you can go through it as an individual, and that way it's self-paced. It's all online, and so you can go as fast or as slow as you want through those 10 sessions. And then as a small group, if you prefer to do that, to get 3 or 5 guys, 7, 8, 9 guys together and to walk through it, it's a great study for you. It's 10 lessons, and you do a little bit of homework in preparation, about an hour of homework, where you do a little Bible study, you watch 1 or 2 videos, and then you come together and you discuss the questions that are provided in the study guide. And then if we go to your church, which we have done now, I was just down in Georgia this spring, and we did a Friday night for a couple hours, and then we did Saturday from like 8 to 3, and just walk them through. We did, in the live version, they don't get everything. It's a little bit of bridge just to get through it in the time frame, but you get the majority of it, and you get the nuts and bolts of it. And then if someone really wants to go deeper, they can do that on their own. They can just buy the course and go through it and get the whole enchilada, in a sense.
Steve, so it's self-paced,
Yep.
10 lessons designed for individuals, small groups, or a live event. Our listeners might want to know, what level of maturity should a guy be at going through this?
Yeah.
Is this appropriate for new believers? Does somebody have to be a little more advanced? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I wrote it for everyone.
Okay.
And so if you're a new believer, like I said in the intro, when I first came to Christ, this guy gave me the master plan of evangelism. He said, this is what your life is about. It's about making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And I was like, wow, does everyone do this? And I realized that the Great Commission is not just for some people, it's for everybody. And so that's why this material, we've taken it, we've made it accessible and understandable for a person who's been a believer for a few weeks to a few months to the guy who's been walking with Jesus for 40 or 50 years. And so it really is something that anyone can go through.
Outstanding. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the lessons. What do you cover in the lessons? You said there are, again, there's the individual, there's a small group, or there's a live event, but there are 10 lessons that are self-paced. What are they like? What do they cover?
So what we cover is, I want you to picture as listeners just sort of a circle. And on that circle, you're going to have 6 boxes. And these are the 6 areas that we're going to go through over time. And it starts with the man that God uses. And we really look at Nehemiah chapter 1, and we look at how some of the qualities that God used in his life to have him have such an impact. Because I think I started there because so many guys feel inadequate. They don't feel like they know enough, or they're good enough, or things like that. So we just started to look at and say, listen, God uses ordinary guys to do the extraordinary. And you just have to be available. You need to be faithful, and that God's going to use you right in your space and right in your place. That God's going to use a prayerful man. And we even talk about, how do I pray for people? How do I pray for my neighbors, for family members, and things like that? And then the second lesson is, what does it mean to live and love like Jesus? And so we just look at the Gospels, and we look at the life of Jesus, and how did he engage with people? We spend a little bit of time of talking about, as a believer, every one of us has an option. We can either isolate ourselves from others, which a lot of people do. We sort of get into our holy huddle, or we assimilate and we just become like the world. We're no different. But Jesus says, Jesus didn't isolate himself. He didn't just become like the world, but he engaged the world. He was in it, but not of it. And so we talk about, what does that mean? And how did Jesus do that? By looking at a number of Jesus encounters with other people.
Hey, man, you don't want to miss a beat of what our guests have to say. Make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcast, and follow us on social media at No Regrets Men. Either way, we appreciate your time and hope you have been encouraged in your ministry to men. Our goal, like yours, is to change the world one man at a time.
Then the third component is, we talk about sharing. What does it mean to share your testimony? And I talk about the fact that our testimony is one of the most powerful tools we have, because no one can argue with it. It's what God's done in your life, right? And your testimony points people to Jesus, and your testimony is something that can act as a transitional, explains the gospel. And so we literally I explain how to write a testimony. They write out their testimony. They share it in a safe group so they can practice it in a sense. And then we talk about sharing the gospel. And what is the gospel? And what are some principles for sharing the gospel? And then we talk about, there's different ways of doing it. And so what are those different ways? And we give them the tools to do that. So those are the first 3 lessons that we get into right there. And then we continue to move around the circle, and we talk about, okay, now let's say a guy has come to Christ. We talk about launching them, and how do you launch a men's small group? How do you take 3 to 5 guys who are sitting around? How do you invite guys to be in a small group? How do you know who to invite to be in a small group? What materials do you use? When do you do it? And we just give them the very basics on how to start a small group, and how to get it started, and how do you facilitate it? Yeah. How do you lead it? And we spend a lot of time on that. And then we also give them a tool, and it's called the Bible Discovery Group. And a Bible Discovery Group is a simple tool, as it says, using the Bible as the content. Again, normally starting with the life of Jesus, and allowing the guys in that group to discover the truths found in the scriptures. And it's just opening up the word, taking a small section, and we teach you using 7 basic questions how to lead a group, something anyone can do anywhere at any time. And so we teach them about that, and we walk them through it teach them how to do it, and then they actually do it in their small group, taking turns so they feel confident in doing it. And then the sixth main lesson is how do I identify, develop, and deploy an apprentice? A movement of discipleship happens when apprentices are identified and launched to do for others what you did for them.
Yeah.
And so we just talk about some basic things you can do to identify that person and develop them in the context of your community, in the context of your small group. And then what does it look like for another group to get started out of that?
Wow.
So that's sort of the full cycle.
Yeah.
Where you've lived among, you've prayed for, you've shared with, you've got them, you've started a small group, and then you launch them out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exciting to see how God's used it already in less than a year to have so many guys catch a vision for what God wants to do in their space and place.
I love, Steve, your description of it, how it builds one step upon the next, starting in a prayerful relationship, modeling our lives and our loves after Jesus, and diving into God's word to see how those Jesus encounters in the Gospels worked, building up a testimony, understanding how God has worked in each of our lives and how to communicate that, and then rehearsing that in a safe setting, building up that authentic community, and then working to reproduce in the lives of others what has happened with you. I love that circular aspect to it, that it just keeps going, because I think in the by definition in the Great Commission, if we are to go and make disciples, it means that we have disciples who make disciples, who make disciples,
that's the
who
goal.
Make disciples. And that circular nature of it, that circular design of it, is God ordained, I believe. And so I love how each section builds on the next. Now, Steve, what have you seen in the places where this has been rolled out, either the live event or with small groups or individuals?
Yeah.
What have you seen? What kind of feedback or reaction so far?
Yeah, and we've piloted it with a bunch of groups before we rolled it out. And we also had a bunch of guys individually go through it. And then right after we rolled it out, we did it in a church setting down in Georgia. And the stories have been so positive. I think what we're hearing, I just talked to a guy last week, and he went through it here in the Milwaukee area with 4 or 5 other guys, and they've been around the church for a while. They've been believers. And he said, Steve, it ignited a fire in me. He says, my church in Florida, where he lives half the year now, he's having a men's conference in September. And he says, I've already invited 4 or 5 guys, and it's because of 101. He said, it inspired me just to invite the guys in my condo complex, the guys I know at church that aren't doing anything, the guys that I ride with. He says, I've extended the invitation and they're all coming. He said, it's unbelievable. And he says, I probably would have just gone by myself just 6 months ago. But because I went through there with some other guys and I'm accountable to them now and I want to make a difference, I've invited them. All right. And that was a big step for him. And I thought, wow, I said, that a way to go. I said, that's a great outcome. I talked to another guy who's never shared his testimony. He knew he had one. He knew he should do it, but he didn't know how. He didn't know what to do. And he said he went through this and he just took the 3 parts, my life before Christ, how I came to Christ, and my life after. He says, and Steve, I wrote it out and I ran it by my wife and we talked about it. We refined it. I gave it to my kids at the dinner table. And he says, I actually, a few weeks later, had an opportunity in a conversation just to share my story. And this guy was over the top.
Right. So
he says, Steve, I've never done it in the last 20 years of being a believer.
Yeah.
And because he said, I just didn't know what to do. And he says, it was so, the thing I'm hearing is it's so practical. Yeah. We just are giving guys tools of how to pray, how to write the testimony, how to share the gospel, how to start a group, how to look for an apprentice. And we're just giving them these simple tools and making it very bottom shelf.
Yeah.
And that's what guys want.
Yeah.
Just give it to me in the bottom
It's
shelf.
amazing what God does when we bring it to the bottom shelf, when we make it practical for people. These are not, candidly, these are not new concepts.
No, not at all.
Or methods or practices you're talking about. These are all things that have been around for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
But what we've done with this tool is to make it very practical, very intentional, step by step, and very accessible for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that result.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think for a church that's out there, or a leader, any guy that's out there, you can go to our website, noregretsmen.org, and on there, look under training, and you'll see the DiscipleMaker 101. And again, you can go through this individually, and maybe you want to do that just to see it, and get a taste for it. If you're a small group leader and you're saying, what are we going to do this fall? This would be a great tool, a great small group study, and have each of the guys get it. And then you just go through the 10 sessions together. And like I said earlier, really recommend you get the book by Bobby Harrington, the Disciple Maker's Handbook that goes with it. And if you're a church, we would love to come in. We're developing a team of trainers, and we'd love to come in for a Friday night or Saturday and bring this right to your church to really mobilize them. The cool thing about the church in Georgia is that they had set as a church a goal for last year to make a difference in their society, and to really mobilize their people to step out and serve and to engage others. And then they saw this, and they said this was the perfect thing to help them reach their goal as a church. And it was just so cool. We had 150 guys at tables of 6 or 8 in the gym, and the discussions were amazing. I couldn't shut them up. They were so engaged, and we were working from the front, taking questions and working with them. And I just love those settings where we can go in with 20, 30, 40, 50 guys, whatever it is, and just, lead your guys through this to equip them to really make a difference in their world.
Well, leaders, as you're listening to this, if you are interested in igniting that same kind of fire in your disciple-making movement, check out our website. Check out DiscipleMaker101. Great tool. Steve, thank you so much for just guiding the team to the development of this, and how powerful it's already been in so many lives. So we're excited to see what God does with it, and leaders, we want to encourage you to use it and to get it out there and use it in your setting. Steve, once again, it is our time is up, and leaders, we just hope that this episode has been helpful to you as you are trying to make disciples in your sphere of influence. Thank you so much for dialing in. Don't forget something very important. If you find this podcast helpful, tell others about it by sharing your feedback on whatever platform you use for your podcast. We really appreciate your support, your feedback, and your reviews. For Steve Sonneman, I'm Troy Thomas. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.menwithnoregrets.org/podcast.